Collinsville, Illinois sat quietly on the edge of the Mississippi River, a place where nothing much ever happened until the summer of 1999. The town had that Midwest charm: neat lawns, modest houses, and a rhythm that never hurried. People worked, went to church, and gossiped over pie at diners that never changed their menus. It was the kind of place where everyone thought they knew everyone else. But even towns like that have shadows that never fade. In the fading light of a June evening, a 17-year-old girl named Melissa Crane vanished on her walk home from her part-time job at Hank's Diner. The police searched the fields, the riverside, and the back roads. They found her bicycle 2 days later, bent and abandoned near an old service road. Melissa was never found. The case went cold, but Collinsville never forgot. It became one of those stories people whispered about. Parents warning their kids to be home before dark, old-timers remembering the search parties, and teenagers daring each other to walk the same road at night. By 2025, most people had moved on. The town grew, faces changed, and memories faded. But when the local news broke the headline, 1999, cold case solved, Collinsville man arrested, it was as if the past had been dragged screaming into the present. At the center of the storm was Detective Laura Monroe, 41, a lifelong resident of Collinsville. She had been a child when Melissa disappeared, 8 years old, clutching her mother's hand as helicopters hovered overhead. That memory had shaped her entire career. Laura parked her unmarked car outside the Collinsville Police Department, the same red brick building that had handled the case 26 years earlier. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain tapping against the windshield. She had seen the evidence herself. The DNA results had come in last week. The suspect wasn't just someone she knew. It was Tom Crane, Melissa's older brother. Inside the department, whispers ran wild. Officers exchanged glances but avoided Laura's eyes. The chief had warned everyone to keep quiet until the press conference. But in a town like Collinsville, secrets didn't last an hour. Tom had been one of the town's golden boys in the late 90s. A football star, polite, clean-cut, working part-time at his dad's auto shop. After Melissa's disappearance, he spiraled. He left town in 2001, joined the Army, and never came back, until last month when he returned for his father's funeral. Now he was sitting in an interrogation room down the hall, silent, staring at his hands. Laura took a deep breath before entering the room. Tom looked up slowly, eyes hollow but steady. He wasn't the same kid she remembered from the newspaper photos. His hair was graying, his shoulders heavier. But there was still something about him, an intensity that made the air feel too tight. He said he didn't do it. He said he'd loved his sister more than anyone. But the DNA on the fabric scrap found behind the old grain silo said otherwise. Outside, the town buzzed with disbelief. Reporters camped in front of the police station. Social media lit up with hashtags. Justice for Melissa trended across Illinois. Neighbors debated whether it was true or another police mistake. At Betty's coffee house, 2 women in their 60s whispered over lattes, remembering the day Melissa vanished. At the high school gym, teachers avoided the subject while students secretly shared conspiracy videos on their phones. Everyone had an opinion. No one had peace. Meanwhile, Laura's phone rang nonstop. Journalists wanted statements. Old classmates wanted gossip, and her mother wanted reassurance that the town wasn't cursed. But the only thing Laura wanted was sleep. She drove home past the Crane house, now abandoned, windows boarded, yard overgrown. She remembered trick-or-treating there when she was a kid, Melissa in a witch costume handing out candy. She could still hear the laughter, see the porch light flickering in the autumn air. That image clung to her as she entered her empty apartment. She poured herself a glass of whiskey and stared at the evidence file spread across her table. Photos, maps, and transcripts from 1999 covered every inch. One page stood out. A witness statement from a man named Earl Jennings, a truck driver who claimed he'd seen a teenage girl near the old highway that night. His story was dismissed back then, labeled unreliable, but Laura's gut told her there was something there. Why had Tom's DNA appeared on a scrap of fabric that had been sealed for over 2 decades? How could that even happen unless someone tampered with the evidence, or unless the past wasn't what anyone thought? The case was open again, but this time, it wasn't just about justice. It was about truth, and truth in Collinsville had a price. By morning, the arrest would be national news. Helicopters would hover again. The ghosts of 1999 were awake. As Laura watched the sunrise bleed over the rooftops, she knew two things for sure. 1. Someone in town was still lying. And 2. Melissa's story wasn't over. The morning after the arrest, Collinsville woke up in disbelief. For the first time in years, the town's quiet streets were flooded with reporters, vans, and camera crews. The flashing lights from the police station bounced off the wet pavement, painting the sidewalks in red and blue streaks. People gathered outside, holding coffee cups and murmuring in shock. Nobody wanted to believe that Tom Crane, the boy who used to mow lawns for neighbors, who volunteered at the church youth group, who cried when Melissa went missing, could have done it. But belief didn't matter now. The evidence spoke louder than nostalgia. Inside the station, Detective Laura Monroe stood in front of the whiteboard covered with photos. Melissa's smiling face at 17 looked back at her, frozen in a world before smartphones and social media. Next to it, she had pinned a recent picture of Tom in handcuffs, taken by the local press. The contrast between the two images was brutal. Laura rubbed her temples. Something about this case wasn't right. The evidence, the timing, the sudden match after so many years, it all felt too neat. She walked to the evidence locker and stared at the sealed plastic bags from 1999. They were dusty, labeled in fading ink. The fabric scrap, the bicycle chain, the photographs of the service road. She remembered when cold case archives were more storage than science. DNA testing back then was primitive compared to what they had now. The new match had come from a state database after Tom's recent arrest for a minor bar fight in Missouri. His fingerprints and DNA had been entered into the system, triggering a hit. It looked perfect on paper. Too perfect. Her partner, Detective Marcus Hale, entered the room carrying 2 coffees. He was older, gruff, with a skeptical calm that came from decades of disappointment. "You're still at it, huh?" he muttered, setting 1 cup beside her. She nodded. "Something doesn't add up, Marcus. What, you think the lab screwed up?" "No," she said slowly, scanning the timeline. "I think someone wanted Tom to take the fall." He gave her that look. Half amusement, half concern. "Conspiracies don't solve cases, Laura. Evidence does," she didn't argue. But in her gut, she knew this wasn't over. Meanwhile, across town, Tom Crane sat in his cell at the Madison County Jail, head down, refusing interviews. His public defender, a young attorney named Erica Nolan, tried to convince him to talk, but he stayed silent except for one phrase. "You're wasting your time." "I didn't kill my sister." The press had already convicted him. Talk shows called it the monster next door. Old classmates gave interviews saying Tom had always been strange after Melissa vanished. Even the pastor at their old church hesitated when asked to defend him. Only one person stood by him, Claire Jennings, the daughter of the truck driver witness from 1999. She was a journalist now, working for an online outlet based in St. Louis. Claire remembered the day her father came home shaken, saying he'd seen a girl running down the highway near the grain silos. Nobody believed him. The police back then said his timeline didn't match. Her father died in 2012, still insisting that the girl was Melissa. When Claire saw the headline about Tom's arrest, she drove straight to Collinsville. She wasn't there to write a story. She was there to find out if her father had been right all along. She found Laura at the diner, Hank's Diner, still standing, still serving the same greasy pancakes. Laura was sitting in a booth flipping through the old case file. Claire slid into the opposite seat without asking. "Detective Monroe," she said. "You don't know me, but my father was Earl Jennings." Laura froze, lowering the file. "He was one of the original witnesses," Claire continued. "He saw a girl near the silos. The police said he was mistaken, but he wasn't." Laura studied her. "You think Melissa made it that far?" "I think she did," Claire replied. "And I think whoever took her didn't expect anyone to see." For the first time, Laura saw a thread connecting 2 decades of silence. Over the next days, Laura quietly reopened the field investigation. Unofficially, she revisited the service road, the riverbank, the old grain silos now half collapsed and covered in graffiti. She walked the same path Melissa would have taken home that night. There, behind the silos, she found something the old reports had overlooked, a rusted license plate buried under mud. It was barely legible, but she took photos and logged it as supplemental evidence. She sent the image for a trace. The number belonged to a pickup truck registered in 1999 to Earl Jennings, Claire's father. Her blood went cold. Either Earl had been closer to the scene than he claimed, or someone had planted the evidence decades later. She drove straight to Claire's motel. Claire was sitting by the window, laptop open, writing notes. When Laura placed the photo on the table, Claire stared at it in disbelief. "That's my dad's truck," she whispered. "But it was stolen that summer." "He reported it," Laura frowned. "There's no record of that report." Claire's voice trembled. "Because the officer who took it, Officer Brent Doyle, was Tom Crane's cousin." The room went silent. It was the first clear fracture in the official story. Laura's mind spun with possibilities. What if the wrong person had been protected all these years? What if the DNA sample that implicated Tom had been swapped with something taken from a shared item? An old shirt, a family keepsake, something easy to contaminate. Meanwhile, Tom sat alone, watching raindrops race down the cell window. His thoughts looped back to that night. He had been at a bonfire with friends until almost midnight. He remembered coming home, seeing his mother asleep on the couch, hearing the back door creak in the wind. He thought Melissa had already gone to bed. But when the sun rose, she was gone. He spent days searching, driving the roads, yelling her name until his throat bled. He remembered one thing clearly: a blue pickup parked near the grain silos the night before. He'd mentioned it to the police back then. Nobody cared. Now, sitting in a cell, he wondered if he'd been staring at the real killer all along. Laura's investigation grew riskier by the day. Her superior, Chief Daniels, called her into his office. "I'm hearing rumors you've been reopening the Crane case without clearance," he said, voice sharp. "I'm following up on inconsistencies," she replied evenly. "Drop it, Laura. We got the DNA. The case is closed." But she didn't. She met Claire again that night at the silos. The wind howled through the hollow metal walls as thunder rolled in the distance. They searched the ground with flashlights, mud clinging to their boots. Claire stopped suddenly. "Look." Half buried near the concrete foundation was a thin gold chain, tangled, rusted but with a small charm shaped like a heart. Laura recognized it instantly. It matched the necklace Melissa was wearing in her missing person photo. She bagged it carefully. If this was genuine, it meant the site had never been fully processed or had been avoided. Lightning flashed overhead as rain poured down. Claire turned to Laura, voice trembling. "My dad said he saw 2 people that night. A girl running, and someone chasing her. Who?" He didn't know. He said the man was tall, wearing a dark jacket. The next morning, the results on the necklace came back. Partial DNA, degraded, but not Tom's. Laura's heart pounded. Someone else had been there. Before she could share the results, her access to the lab database was revoked. Her badge pinged as restricted. She called Marcus. He hesitated before answering. "Laura, the chief ordered all files sealed. They're saying the case is under federal review." "That's impossible," she said. "I'm sorry," he replied quietly. "They're saying you compromised evidence." Her blood ran cold. Someone inside the department was shutting her down. By evening, a news alert flashed across every screen. Detective Laura Monroe suspended pending investigation. She stared at her phone in disbelief as rain battered her windshield. Somewhere in Collinsville, the truth was buried deeper than anyone imagined, and someone was willing to destroy her to keep it that way. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It came down in relentless sheets, washing the town in gray and memory. Collinsville had always been the kind of place where people believed that bad weather carried bad omens, and this storm felt biblical. Detective Laura Monroe sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by boxes of old files and the hum of a single desk lamp. Her badge lay on the table beside a half-empty bottle of bourbon. The suspension notice sat folded next to it, stamped with the chief's signature and the department's seal. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Reporters, old colleagues, even her mother. She ignored them all. The story had exploded. The headlines were vicious. Detective who led cold case investigation under internal review. They made it sound like she'd framed Tom Crane herself. But beneath the noise, Laura's mind refused to quiet down. The gold necklace, the missing police report about the stolen truck, the revoked access to the lab. None of it added up unless someone in the department had been tampering with the evidence all along. She opened her laptop and replayed the crime scene photos for the 100th time. The field, the silos, the position of Melissa's bike. Each image told a story, but not the one she'd been told to believe. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, Claire Jennings stood there, drenched, clutching a folder wrapped in plastic. "They raided my motel room," Claire said breathlessly. "Someone's watching me. I found this before they showed up." Inside the folder were photocopies of an old ledger from 1999, labeled Property Evidence Log, Collinsville PD. Some entries were highlighted in yellow. Melissa Crane's case file. Several items listed as missing or transferred for testing. The name signed at the bottom of each transfer: Officer Brent Doyle, Tom's cousin. Laura's pulse quickened. "Where did you get this?" "My father," Claire said. "It was in one of his old lockboxes. He must have kept it as proof that someone in the department mishandled evidence. I didn't even know it existed until now." Laura flipped through the pages. The fabric scrap, the bicycle chain, and her eyes stopped. The necklace. It had been logged as recovered, then marked lost in storage 3 days later. But she'd just found it last week buried behind the silos. Someone had put it back. That was the turning point. For the first time in 26 years, Laura felt the narrative crack open like a wound. Whoever had taken Melissa had not acted alone, and whoever helped cover it up had done so from inside the police department. Claire leaned forward. "We need to find out what Doyle was hiding." "He still lives here," Laura said, standing up. "Out near the old water tower," Claire frowned. "You're suspended." Laura gave a faint smile. "Good thing I'm not following orders anymore." The drive to Doyle's house was tense. The storm had eased into a mist that clung to the fields, turning the headlights into halos. Collinsville at night felt like a ghost town. Familiar yet distant, every street a memory of what had gone wrong. Doyle's house sat at the edge of a wooded lot, isolated and half forgotten. The porch light flickered weakly, and a truck with expired plates sat in the driveway. Laura parked down the road and checked her pistol, still in her glove compartment despite her suspension. Claire followed silently, camera slung over her shoulder. They moved toward the house, hearts pounding. From inside came the faint glow of a television. Laura peered through the window. Officer Brent Doyle was slumped in an armchair, a bottle in his hand, the room littered with beer cans. His uniform jacket hung on the wall beside a framed certificate of service. He looked like a man who'd aged twice his years in guilt. Laura knocked once hard. Doyle flinched, turning his head. His eyes widened when he saw her. "What the hell do you want, Monroe?" "Answers." He laughed bitterly. "You got me suspended once already. What more do you need?" "You tampered with evidence in the Crane case." His face went pale. Claire stepped forward. "My father's truck report. You filed it. You erased it." Doyle stood, trembling slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." Laura's tone sharpened. "The necklace was logged under your name. You said it went missing. Then someone planted it back at the scene. Why?" He rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath. "Because I was told to," he finally said. Laura's stomach dropped. "By who?" He hesitated, eyes darting to the wall where his gun hung. She saw the shift in his body language a split second before he reached for it. Laura lunged forward, knocking the weapon aside. The gun hit the floor, discharging once. The sound exploded through the small house. Doyle stumbled backward, shouting, "Get out. You don't understand. You'll end up dead like the rest of them." But it was too late. The sirens were already coming. Someone had called it in. Laura and Claire fled through the back door, sprinting across the wet grass into the woods. The air smelled of mud and ozone. When they stopped to catch their breath, Laura could still hear Doyle yelling inside, half mad, half scared. They hid behind a fallen tree as police cruisers arrived. Through the trees, they watched as officers stormed the house. A single gunshot echoed. Then silence. Claire's voice trembled. What just happened? Laura's eyes were fixed on the house. Someone made sure he'd never talk. The next morning, news broke that Officer Brent Doyle had died by self-inflicted gunshot. The department called it a tragedy. Laura called it a cleanup. She sat with Claire in the diner again, staring at her untouched coffee. The waitress tried to smile, but her eyes were heavy with questions. Everyone in Collinsville had heard. Everyone had opinions. But no one wanted to say the word murder. Claire leaned forward. "They'll pin this on him now. Say he acted alone. Case closed." Laura nodded grimly. Exactly what they want. She opened her phone and pulled up the digital copy of the evidence ledger. There was one more signature on the bottom. Someone who had approved the transfer of Melissa's evidence back in 2000, Captain Henry Monroe. Her father. The room spun. Claire watched her face change. "What is it?" Laura whispered. "My father was the one who signed off on the missing items." She couldn't breathe. Her father had been the department's captain until his retirement in 2005. He'd died 5 years ago. Cancer. The idea that he could have been part of the cover-up was something she wasn't ready to face. She stood abruptly. "I need air." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The town was quiet again, pretending nothing had happened. But Laura felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. If her father had protected someone, it meant this conspiracy ran deeper than she imagined. And if Doyle had been silenced, she might be next. Claire caught up with her in the parking lot. "You're shaking." Laura managed a faint smile. "I just realized. I'm investigating my own family." They drove to the Monroe family home on the outskirts of town, a 2-story farmhouse Laura hadn't visited since her father's funeral. Dust coated the windows and ivy crawled up the porch rail. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and lost time. In his office, the walls were lined with boxes of files and old police memorabilia. Laura sifted through stacks of papers, her hands trembling. Claire found a locked drawer in the desk. Laura picked it open with her father's old penknife. Inside was a single VHS tape labeled July 1999, Crane. Laura's pulse thundered as she inserted it into the old player. The screen flickered and grainy footage appeared, an interrogation room. Her father sat across from a man she didn't recognize. The timestamp read July 14, 1999, 3 weeks after Melissa's disappearance. Her father's voice was calm. "You understand the situation, son. She was found near your property. We can make this go away, but you need to disappear for a while." The man across the table lowered his head. The image was too blurry to see his face, but when he spoke, Laura felt the air leave her lungs. It was Tom Crane's voice. Claire gasped. "That can't be right. He was 17. Laura paused the tape. Her father's words echoed, "We can make this go away." She pressed play again. The tape cut to static halfway through. But one final frame remained. A close-up of a folder labeled Jennings, witness statement. Laura's hands shook. It wasn't Tom. It was his father, Edward Crane. Tom had taken the blame for something his father had done. She sat back, eyes burning. Her entire career, her entire life in law enforcement, had been built on the foundation her father created, and it was all rotten. Claire whispered, "You know what this means." Laura nodded. "If I go public with this, they'll destroy me. But if I don't, Melissa never gets justice." She looked into the camera lens Claire carried, the one that had been recording the entire time. "If you're watching this," she said softly, "you deserve to know the truth. It's never too late to bring light to what others tried to bury." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't flinch. "So if you believe in justice, if you believe stories like this matter, stay with us. Because the real story, the one they never wanted told, is just beginning." Soft CTA embedded naturally. If you're following this case and want to know what really happened in Collinsville, subscribe and stay until the end. The truth is darker and closer than anyone imagined. The camera blinked red. Recording. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled again, and in that moment, Laura realized that every lie was about to come undone. The next 48 hours changed everything. Detective Laura Monroe and journalist Claire Jennings uploaded the recovered VHS footage to an encrypted cloud drive and made 3 physical copies, one hidden in Claire's car, one mailed to a trusted contact in St. Louis, and one locked in Laura's gun safe. Neither of them trusted the Collinsville Police Department anymore. The video had exposed a decades-old cover-up. Captain Henry Monroe had protected Edward Crane, Tom and Melissa's father, from prosecution. The man had vanished not long after the disappearance, supposedly taking construction work out of state. Now it was clear he had fled. Laura felt her stomach twist as she realized her father, her hero, had traded justice for loyalty. They drove north along the river to Cedar Hollow, a forgotten industrial town where Edward Crane's name had appeared on an old Union payroll. Rain followed them like a curse. Claire filmed everything. Laura drove in silence, eyes fixed on the endless gray road. Cedar Hollow looked dead. Half-collapsed warehouses lined the riverbank. Smoke curled from a single chimney where someone still worked the scrapyard. They found the foreman, an old man in greasy overalls who squinted when Laura showed him the photograph. "Eddie Crane?" he said. "Yeah, I remember him." Kept to himself. Lived in a trailer by the quarry. Haven't seen him since spring. Left quick? Where'd he go? The man shrugged. Said something about Missouri. Family trouble. Laura and Claire searched the trailer anyway. The door was unlocked, the air thick with mildew. Inside were rusted tools, empty beer cans, and a single framed picture of Melissa, cut from a newspaper clipping. Claire whispered, "He kept her photo." Laura studied the walls. A calendar from 2005 hung crooked, its dates marked with red ink. She noticed a phone number scrawled along the border. She dialed it. Voicemail. A man's voice answered, Edward Crane. He was alive. Back in Collinsville, the department released a public statement closing the investigation after Doyle's suicide. The official story was clean. Brent Doyle had tampered with evidence to protect himself. Tom Crane remained in custody. Laura watched the broadcast on a diner television. Her face, caught in old footage, appeared beside the headline, "Suspended Detective Under Review." She turned to Claire. "They're burying it again." "Then we go public," Claire said. Laura hesitated. "We need proof, something undeniable." Claire smiled faintly. "We have it. We just need him. Edward Crane." They tracked the phone number to a prepaid device last pinged near Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Laura borrowed her mother's car, an old Buick that rattled over every bump, and they drove through the night. Highway 55 stretched out like a scar across the state line. The radio played static. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was heavy but alive with purpose. At dawn, they reached a trailer park outside the city. Children's bicycles lay scattered on the gravel. Dogs barked behind fences. In the far corner, a faded blue trailer matched the registration records. Laura's pulse hammered as she approached. The door creaked open before she could knock. Edward Crane stood in the doorway. Time had punished him. Gray hair, sunken eyes, trembling hands, but the sharpness remained. He recognized her instantly. "You look like Henry," he said quietly. Laura froze. "You knew my father?" He nodded. "Better than you think." Behind her, Claire's camera blinked red. Laura stepped closer. "You disappeared after Melissa died." His jaw tightened. "I didn't kill my daughter." "Then why did my father cover for you?" He stared past her at the river beyond the park. "Because I made him choose." "Choose what?" "Between justice and his own blood." He motioned for them to come inside. The trailer smelled of tobacco and old coffee. Photos covered the walls. Melissa as a child, Tom in a baseball uniform, a woman Laura assumed was their mother. Edward sat heavily at the table. "I didn't hurt Melissa, but I knew who did. It was Brent Doyle. He was obsessed with her, always hanging around after shifts at the diner. The night she disappeared, I saw his truck near the silos. I confronted him. We fought." Laura's heart pounded. "You told my father. I told Henry everything. He said he'd handle it. He said justice would be done." His voice cracked. "Then he came back the next day and told me to keep quiet. That Doyle had powerful friends in the department. That if I didn't leave town, they'd bury us both," Claire whispered. "So he framed Tom instead?" Edward nodded slowly. He thought if Tom left, if the boy built a new life, maybe the town would forget. "But nothing ever dies in this place." Laura's throat burned. "My father protected a killer." Edward looked at her, eyes wet. "He protected you." Doyle threatened to expose him for taking bribes years before. "Your father traded one sin for another." The words landed like blows. Outside, a car door slammed. Laura glanced through the curtain. 2 men in suits approaching fast. "Federal agents?" Claire asked. Edward shook his head. "No, Collinsville PD." Laura recognized one of them, Chief Daniels. They burst through the door before she could react. "Detective Monroe," Daniels barked. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and unauthorized investigation." Laura raised her hands, glaring. "You're covering your tracks," he sneered. "You should have stayed quiet." Edward stepped forward. "She's telling the truth." Daniels didn't hesitate. He struck Edward with his gun, sending him sprawling. Claire screamed. The second officer seized her camera, smashing it against the floor. Instinct took over. Laura lunged for Daniel's arm, twisting the weapon away. A shot exploded through the tiny trailer, shattering the window. The second officer stumbled back, shouting. Laura grabbed Claire's wrist. Run! They fled through the back door into the open field. Rain returned, drenching them as bullets cracked through the air. Claire slipped, scraping her knee, but Laura pulled her up. They dove behind an abandoned pickup, hearts pounding. The agents' voices grew faint as they searched the woods. Claire clutched Laura's arm. They'll kill us. Not if the world sees what we have. Laura pulled a small flash drive from her pocket, the duplicate of the VHS recording. We get this online, and they can't bury it. They crawled through the trees toward the road, flagged down a passing truck, and climbed inside. The driver, an old farmer, didn't ask questions when Laura flashed her badge. By nightfall, they reached a safe house owned by one of Claire's contacts in St. Louis. It was a small apartment above a print shop, walls lined with file boxes and humming computers. Claire began uploading the footage. Laura paced the floor, adrenaline still racing. Her entire world had collapsed in 48 hours, but something inside her had changed. For the first time, she wasn't acting out of duty or guilt. She was fighting for truth itself. When the video finally went live, it spread like wildfire within hours. Major outlets picked up the story. Whistleblower detective exposes police cover-up in 1999 Collinsville murder. The footage showed Henry Monroe negotiating with Edward Crane, and it revealed the falsified evidence logs. Social media exploded. Justice for Melissa trended again, louder than ever. Tom Crane was released from jail that evening pending review. Cameras captured him stepping out of the courthouse, tears streaming down his face. I told you, he whispered to the reporters. I told you I didn't do it. For Laura, it wasn't victory yet, it was chaos. She and Claire were placed under protective custody. As federal investigators descended on Collinsville, Chief Daniels vanished overnight. His house was found empty, files burned in the fireplace. Edward Crane was taken to a hospital in Cape Girardeau, his condition critical but stable. When Laura visited him, he smiled faintly through the bruises. I thought I'd die with it, he said weakly. But you brought her peace. She deserved the truth, Laura replied. He closed his eyes. So did you. Days turned into weeks. The investigation widened. Evidence from the old storage unit revealed fingerprints belonging to Brent Doyle on multiple sealed items. A second set of prints belonging to Chief Daniels confirmed the chain of corruption. Collinsville was drowning in scandal. Officers resigned. Reporters swarmed. And for the first time in decades, Melissa Crane's name was spoken not as a ghost but as a person. Laura stood at the riverbank where Melissa's bicycle had been found 26 years earlier. The sun was setting, turning the water gold. Claire filmed silently from a few steps away. Laura's voice was steady. For 26 years, this town lived with a lie. People told themselves it was over, that justice had been done. But truth doesn't die with paperwork. It waits. She turned toward the camera, eyes glinting. Melissa waited. And now she's finally heard. Claire lowered the camera, tears on her cheeks. You did it. Laura shook her head. We did it. And my father. Maybe in his own way he wanted this to happen. Maybe he knew I'd find it. They stood in silence as the river carried away the last light of day. But the story wasn't done. That night, Laura received a text from an unknown number. You think it's over, it's not. Her breath caught. H. Daniels' first name was Harold. She turned to Claire. He's still out there. Claire raised her camera again, determination in her eyes. Then the next chapter starts now. Laura smiled faintly, exhaustion and resolve mingling in her voice. Then let's finish what we started. The screen faded to black. Voiceover, soft CTA. If you've followed this far, don't look away now. Justice takes time, and sometimes the truth hides in the darkest corners. Stay with us, share this story, and subscribe for the next part. Because in Collinsville, the case may be solved, but the ghosts are still speaking. The morning sun crept over Collinsville, spilling pale light through the motel curtains. Laura hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours. Her desk was buried in printouts, lab reports, case notes, photos, and the last recording she'd made before going off-grid. She hit play again, hearing her own voice echo through the cheap motel speakers. This message is for whoever finds it. The man responsible for Melissa Crane's murder isn't Tom. His name is Brent Doyle, and he's been covering his tracks for 25 years. Her voice cracked on the last line. She stopped the playback and exhaled. Every instinct screamed that time was running out. Claire was sitting across the room, scrolling through archived police radio logs from 1999. Her eyes were red, but her determination hadn't faded. "Listen to this," she said suddenly. "There's a dispatch entry from the night Melissa disappeared. 10:47 p.m. A call from a patrol car near the silos. The officer reported a domestic disturbance involving a juvenile. Guess who made the call?" Laura's eyes narrowed. "Officer Doyle." Claire nodded. "But there's no follow-up, no report, nothing after that line. It's like the system swallowed it." Laura stood pacing the room. If he intercepted Melissa that night, brought her somewhere isolated, and then he buried it, Claire finished. They exchanged a long, heavy silence. Finally, Laura said, "We need proof." Claire looked toward the window. "There's one place we haven't checked. The old Doyle property. His father's workshop behind the farm. It's abandoned now." Laura hesitated only a second before grabbing her coat. "Let's go." The Doyle farm sat on the far edge of Madison County, surrounded by cornfields that swayed in the wind like waves. The old barn loomed in the distance, its roof sagging, walls peeling under decades of rain and neglect. They parked a mile away and walked the rest of the way in silence, flashlights off, relying on moonlight. The air smelled of earth and metal. When they reached the barn, Laura's pulse thudded in her ears. The door creaked open with a soft groan. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Rusted tools hung from hooks, and a tractor engine lay disassembled in the corner. Claire moved her light across the walls, stopping at a heavy wooden workbench. There, beneath a layer of grime, lay a single faded badge. Collinsville Police Department. Laura picked it up, heart hammering. "Doyle's," Claire whispered behind the bench. Something caught Laura's eye. A concrete section of floor that looked newer than the rest. The cement was a different shade, smoother. She crouched, running her hand along the edge. This was poured later. She used a crowbar from the wall and wedged it into the seam. With a crack, the first piece lifted. Beneath it was a hollow space lined with dirt. The beam of her flashlight trembled. Inside lay a small metal box. She pulled it out and opened it. Inside were Polaroids. Melissa, tied and crying, her breath caught. Claire turned away, hand over her mouth. There were also dog tags, jewelry, and a folded note. Laura unfolded it with shaking hands. The handwriting was messy, frantic. She wouldn't stop screaming. "I didn't mean to. Tell Daniels to fix this." Her stomach turned to ice. "Daniels. Chief Daniels," Claire whispered. They covered it up together. The sound of gravel crunching outside froze them both. Headlights flashed through the slats of the barn. Laura killed her flashlight. "Someone's here." They hid behind the tractor as footsteps approached. The barn door swung open. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, wearing a police windbreaker. Doyle. He stepped inside slowly, sweeping a flashlight across the floor. His voice carried low and cold. "I knew you wouldn't stop, Monroe. You should have taken the suspension and disappeared." Laura's fingers closed around her gun, still holstered. "You killed her," she said quietly. "You don't understand what this place was like back then." Doyle growled. "We were told to protect the department. Daniels made the call. She ran into my patrol route, panicked. It was an accident. But then he told me to make it disappear." Claire gasped softly. Doyle turned his flashlight toward the sound. "Who's that?" Laura stepped forward, weapon drawn. "Don't move," he laughed bitterly. "You think you can bring this town justice now? After all these years? You'll destroy everything." The tension hung in the air like static, then suddenly, movement. Doyle lunged, slamming into Laura. The gun clattered across the floor. They struggled, rolling through the dust. He was stronger, fueled by rage and desperation. He pinned her down, hand tightening around her throat. "You should have left it buried," he hissed. Claire grabbed a wrench from the bench and swung. The sound of metal on bone echoed through the barn. Doyle collapsed to his knees, dazed. Laura shoved him off, gasping for air. She grabbed the gun and aimed again. "It's over." Doyle looked up, blood trickling from his temple. "You have no idea how deep this goes." But before he could move again, flashing lights filled the night outside. Sirens wailed. Marcus's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Laura blinked in disbelief. "Marcus?" Doyle froze, then slowly raised his hands. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn. They cuffed Doyle, who glared at Laura with hatred and fear twisted together. As he was dragged away, Marcus approached her. "I tracked your phone," he said quietly. "You're lucky I did." Laura's knees almost gave out. She looked at Claire, who was still trembling, holding the wrench like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "We got him," Claire whispered. Laura nodded, but something in Marcus's expression stopped her from feeling relief. He looked uneasy. "Laura, you need to come with me. Daniels, he's gone. Left town. They found his office wiped clean." Her heart sank. The mastermind had escaped. Hours later, dawn broke over Collinsville. Doyle sat in an interrogation room, silent. His lawyer demanded immediate release, claiming coercion and unlawful entry. But the evidence box, the photos, the note, the necklace, all told the truth. Laura stood behind the glass, watching him. He wouldn't look at her. When the door opened behind her, she turned. Marcus stepped in, his face tired but proud. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied. "We just scratched the surface," he frowned. "What do you mean?" She held up a folder she'd found on Doyle's desk. Inside were photocopies of old police memos, all signed with initials. BD and RD Daniels' full name was Robert Daniels. But the second set of initials, BD, stood for Brad Doyle, Brent's older brother. Laura's stomach dropped. He was a federal liaison during the case. Worked out of St. Louis. If he helped bury it, then this isn't just a local cover-up. Marcus rubbed his face. "You're saying this goes beyond Collinsville?" "I'm saying we just opened a door we can't close," she said. Claire entered the room quietly, holding her camera. "I sent the photos to 3 national outlets," she said. "If anything happens to us, the truth gets out." Laura met her gaze, half grateful, half terrified. "You just declared war, Claire." Claire's voice was steady. "Then let's make it worth it." By noon, the headlines exploded. Officer arrested in 1999. Cold case. Corruption allegations emerge. The town reeled. Reporters swarmed every street corner. The mayor called for an emergency press conference. Tom Crane was released under supervision. When Laura met him outside the station, he looked hollow. Years of pain etched in his face. He tried to speak, but no words came. She simply said, "You're free now, Tom." He nodded slowly, eyes filled with tears. Did she suffer? Laura hesitated, then shook her head. She didn't let him win. He closed his eyes, whispering something she couldn't hear. As he walked away, Laura felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. They had found justice, but not peace. Not yet. That night she drove alone to the silos one last time. The rain had stopped and the air was still. The field was quiet except for the hum of insects and the distant sound of trains. She knelt in the dirt, where the necklace had been found. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. The wind carried the faint scent of corn and dust. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Behind her, headlights flickered on the horizon. Someone was watching. She turned, just as a black SUV pulled onto the service road. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're not done, detective. We remember everything." Her pulse spiked. The SUV backed away, disappearing into the darkness. Laura stood there, breathing hard, the message glowing on her phone screen. Justice had come, but the storm was far from over. 2 years had passed since Collinsville's stormy nights of revelation, arrests, and long-buried secrets. Detective Laura Monroe now stood in a sunlit office in downtown St. Louis, far from the quiet, dusty streets of her hometown. The walls were lined with case files, plaques, and a single framed photograph. Melissa Crane, smiling at 16, caught mid-laugh with the sunlight hitting her hair. Laura had been reinstated in a federal cold case unit. The Collinsville files had earned her national recognition, though the scars of betrayal, her father's legacy, the department cover-ups, remained deeply etched in her conscience. Claire Jennings had relocated to St. Louis as well, now running a successful investigative journalism platform. Together they had formed a quiet alliance, determined to shine light into cold corners wherever corruption hid. It was early autumn. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and dry leaves. Laura sat at her desk, scrolling through reports on a new case in Jefferson County. Her phone buzzed. It was Tom Crane, she answered. "Hello?" Laura, it's me, he said, voice shaking. I just wanted to tell you. Thank you. For what? For believing me. For finding the truth when nobody else would. Laura smiled faintly, her eyes softening. It had been a long journey from a scared teenager taking the fall for a father's sins to a young man walking free, finally allowed to grieve, to live, and to rebuild. 2 blocks away, in a small park near the old Collinsville riverbank, Tom had started a foundation in Melissa's name, the Melissa Crane Fund for Missing Children. The first scholarship had been awarded earlier that year, and he had funded a cold case unit at the local police station to prevent another child from being forgotten. Laura glanced at the photo on her wall. She had come to Collinsville multiple times over the past 2 years, attending memorial events and meeting Melissa's friends and neighbors who had been silenced for decades. The town had changed slowly, painfully. The truth had hurt them, but it had also set them free. She remembered the first time she had returned to the silos after Doyle's arrest. She had knelt there, letting the wind carry her thoughts, tears mingling with the dirt where Melissa's life had been taken. She had whispered, "I will make it right." And now in the quiet of her office, she felt the weight of that promise still steady in her chest. Claire entered, carrying a stack of printouts. "You have to see this," she said. Laura looked up. "What is it?" "It's from the national news. They're doing a retrospective on Collinsville, the cover-up, the arrests, the exposure. They want your statement." Laura leaned back, fingers lacing together. "And the footage?" Claire smiled. "The archive is intact. We made sure of it. Every file, every image. The public sees the story exactly as it happened. No edits, no spin." Laura nodded slowly. She thought of the nights spent in motels, running through rain-soaked fields, dodging bullets, watching corruption unfold in real time. It had almost destroyed her, but now, the story had power to heal. Across town, Tom Crane had organized a memorial service at the riverbank. Hundreds had gathered. Families of victims, journalists, law enforcement officers who had finally acted with integrity, and members of the public who had followed the case since the beginning. Laura arrived quietly, blending into the crowd. Claire was filming from the sidelines. A woman stepped forward to speak. Her name was Janet Hayes, a childhood friend of Melissa. She took a deep breath and began recounting Melissa's kindness, her laughter, her courage, and her dreams that had been stolen too early. Laura listened, feeling the weight of every word. The crowd was silent, hanging on each story. Tears ran freely down faces that had long held grief in private. When Janet finished, the mayor stepped forward and unveiled a bronze plaque. "Melissa Crane, remembered. Justice served." Laura felt a lump in her throat. The plaque wasn't just about justice. It was about remembrance, about recognition of the life that had been erased, about a community reclaiming its conscience. Later, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Laura walked alone along the riverbank. The water reflected shades of amber and violet. She knelt and touched the cool surface, imagining Melissa's spirit lingering in the gentle currents. A familiar voice broke her reverie. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Laura turned. Tom Crane had approached quietly, his hands in his pockets. He looked older, calmer, carrying the lines of trauma but also newfound strength. "It is," she replied. He nodded. "I can't thank you enough for everything you did." "I know you carried this weight too," Laura smiled faintly. "We did it together. Melissa deserves that." They stood in silence, the wind tugging gently at their clothes. It was a moment of peace, fragile but real. In her apartment that night, Laura reflected on the past 2 years. The chaos, the danger, the revelations. They had shaped her into someone she hadn't been before. She was stronger, wiser, and more certain of the moral compass that guided her. Her phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues now eager to rebuild credibility. Federal investigators had taken over several open cases in Madison County, inspired by her work. Claire knocked on the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "To us," she said, handing one to Laura. "To justice," Laura replied, clinking her cup softly against Claire's. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the hum of the city outside. The storm had passed. Weeks later, Laura received a letter with no return address. Inside was a simple note. "Truth lasts longer than lies. Well done, detective. An ally." She smiled, folding the note carefully. Even in a world where corruption had thrived, there were those who still chose integrity. Months later, Laura returned to Collinsville one final time. The town had slowly healed. Businesses reopened, neighbors talked openly, and the riverbanks were once again a place where children laughed instead of hiding in fear. She visited the Crane family plot. Melissa's grave was adorned with flowers and small tokens, handmade bracelets, letters, and candles from strangers who had followed her story across the country. Laura knelt and placed her hand on the cold stone. "We remembered you. We never forgot." She whispered a promise. "You are safe now, and your story lives." A gentle breeze swirled around her, rustling the leaves. She felt the presence of the past, not as a burden but as a testament. Melissa's life had been stolen, but her memory and the justice wrought in her name would endure. Back in St. Louis, Laura and Claire sat together at their office desk, watching the traffic outside. Their partnership had become more than professional. It was a bond forged in fire, truth, and unwavering purpose. Claire looked at her. "So, what's next?" Laura thought for a moment. "Whatever comes. There are still voices that need to be heard, cases that need light. And we'll be ready." She leaned back, eyes on the skyline. "For now, we've closed this chapter," Claire smiled. "And made a difference." Laura nodded. "Exactly. A difference that matters." Fade out. Cinematic voiceover. Final CTA. If you've followed the journey from the shadows of Collinsville to the light of justice, remember this. Truth may be buried, and lies may endure, but courage, persistence, and integrity will always uncover what is hidden. Share this story. Honor those who were silenced, and subscribe to continue uncovering the untold stories that demand to be heard. Because every life deserves justice and every voice deserves to be remembered. The camera pans over the river as the sun sets, golden light spilling across the water. Melissa's photograph appears one last time on screen, smiling, immortalized in memory, justice, and the hearts of those who refuse to forget. Fade to black.